Hello, everyone, and welcome. So today we'll be talking about school attendance challenges. And this presentation is designed to complement a resource that was co-developed by the Canadian School Attendance Partnership and Parents for Children's Mental Health Ontario, bringing together what we know from the research, practice, and the lived experience of families in Ontario. So you'll see that the link to the resource is right here on the slide for easy reference. So to start with introductions, my name is Natasha McBrady, and I come at this conversation with a few different perspectives. So first, I'm a registered psychotherapist, and I've been working in child and youth mental health for over 20 years now, including in my current role at the Yuval Center. And in that work, I've supported many children, youth, and families who have struggled with attendance problems and all of the challenges that come with that. So this experience also, I guess it resonated with me so strongly that I decided to go back to school to complete my PhD at the University of Ottawa, where I focused my research on the intersection of chronic school absenteeism and mental health. And finally, and probably most importantly, I also come to this subject as a parent who supported a young person with chronic school absenteeism. And so I know firsthand how overwhelming and difficult it can be for families to navigate these challenges. All right, so here's what we're going to cover today. I'll start with a brief overview of chronic school absenteeism, what it is, what it looks like, and then we'll talk about why it matters or some of the common causes and impacts and the effects it can have on families. From there, I'll share some ideas on what you can do to support your young person and finally where you can go for help. So let's get started. All right, so you've probably heard a lot of different terms for non-attendance, things like school attendance problems, chronic school absenteeism, skipping school, or school refusal. And there's even more labels out there. And this variety reflects the fact that there isn't a single standardized way to define school attendance issues in research or in practice. In research, the term we most commonly use is chronic school absenteeism, which generally means missing 10% or more of an academic year, which is about 19 days or more. And it's important to understand that even though we've set this 10% threshold for practical reasons, there is no single amount of missed days that's been demonstrated to lead to negative outcomes or to certain impacts. And in fact, in most research, the consensus is that any day missed matters and that any day miss is a missed opportunities to learn, to connect with peers, and to access vital school supports. So in addition to how much school is missed, there are different types of attendance problems. So you've probably heard terms like excused or unexcused absences, where excused absences are things like doctor's appointments or sports events, things that are typically sanctioned by the parent or a school. On the other hand, unexcused absences might include things like ditching a class or skipping school. But non-attendance is far more complex than just excused or unexcused, and different types of non-attendance might require different solutions. So researchers have developed frameworks to better understand and categorize these variations, and one prominent researcher, David Heine, identifies 4 types of school non-attendance. So the first is school refusal or avoidance, and this is where the child isn't attending because they perhaps feel too anxious or too overwhelmed. So these are sort of child-motivated absences. The second would be school withdrawal. So these might be parent-motivated attendance issues. So for example, a parent who keeps a child home to work, babysit, or support family income. There is school exclusion. So for example, suspensions or expulsions, or situations where the school doesn't have the resources to keep a child in class. And finally, truancy, which we often refer to as skipping, when a child or youth misses school without permission. Now, in reality, non-attendance often takes multiple forms. So a young person might avoid school one day and then they skip the next day for entirely different reasons. And absences also vary in duration. So we talk about chronic school absenteeism for things like skipping a single class, but it could also be for arriving late consistently or missing entire days or even months. So tracking attendance, all these, differences make tracking attendance something that's not super straightforward because some kids, in addition, might be, skipping class, but still physically present in school. It can also be invisible. So kids who perhaps have changed schools or haven't attended so long that they no longer appear on the school registry. So all of this illustrates the complexity, variability, and opacity of school attendance, which makes understanding, tracking, and addressing school attendance issues particularly challenging. So this complexity also makes it difficult to understand the scope of school attendance issues in Canada. There isn't a coordinated system for collecting attendance data nationwide, but we do have reason to believe that chronic school absenteeism is increasing. So for example, in 2024, the CBC published an investigative report highlighting concerns about rising non-attendance rates since the pandemic. And similarly, data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development shows that in 2022, 29% of Canadian 15-year-olds reported skipping school at least once in the previous 2 weeks, up from 23% in 2018. But still, there are significant gaps in both data and research in Canada, so we don't yet fully understand the scale of the problem or how to intervene. What we do know is that attendance matters. So even though we have these gaps in Canadian data, international research shows that regular attendance is critical for both academic success and social emotional development. School, as we know, isn't just about curriculum. It's where children make friends, they develop new skills, and they access important services. And for many students, school provides things like nutrition, physical activity, and for some, a vital connection to health, developmental, and mental health services. On the other hand, when children and youth aren't attending school, we see a range of negative outcomes, and these can include things like lower academic achievement, increased grade retention, and decreased engagement and social participation. Chronic school absenteeism has also been linked to higher rates of risk behaviors, things like substance use or risky sexual behavior. And unfortunately, students who miss school regularly are also more vulnerable to dropping out and becoming involved with the justice system and experiencing mental distress or mental health disorders. Looking at long-term outcomes, education is a well-established social determinant of health. So higher educational attainment is linked to better health decision-making for both individuals and their families. And it's also associated with higher social status and stronger social support, both of which contribute to improved physical and mental health. And conversely, individuals who leave school early face higher rates of unemployment, which is closely connected to poorer health outcomes and lower life expectancy. So while we understand the impacts of non-attendance, we're still trying to figure out why kids miss school. And there are factors at the individual, family, school, community, and system levels that can make getting to school difficult. At the individual level, this might include learning challenges or mental health issues that interfere with attendance. At the family level, factors could include parents who are stretched or who are struggling with their own challenges. At the school level, issues like bullying or programs that don't match a child's interests can make school feel unwelcoming. And at the community or systems level, barriers might include a lack of transportation, affordable housing, food insecurity, or systemic discrimination that impacts school participation. What we know is that chronic absenteeism is often a symptom of a deeper challenge. And while parents and schools often bear a lot of the blame and are expected to fix attendance, the solutions need to go beyond the family and school unit. Community and system level change, collaboration across sectors, and an all hands on deck approach are critical to truly supporting kids to attend school. In addition to the outcomes I've discussed, we know that school non-attendance or chronic absenteeism can have an important impact on families. Families often carry the stress silently, juggling work, siblings, and calls from the school. Parents are often the first to intervene, and they may experience many consequences in addition to the worry they have for their kids. They might have to miss work to support their child or attend meetings. They're likely to feel quite stressed or feel that they're to blame for their child's school attendance problems. They might even start to feel frustrated with their child or just give up because they feel like they've tried everything and nothing's working. It can also be stressful to get those daily calls from the school, and the stressors don't only affect parents, they affect the whole family, including the siblings. So again, while we don't have a lot of research evidence to guide interventions, there are some common sense strategies that can help. So first, set positive school habits and routines, especially in the early years, attendant patterns that often start in kindergarten. And so establishing good habits early on sets the stage for later success. You might also want to talk about the importance of school, so why you value education and what missing school can mean for learning and opportunities. Whenever possible, scheduling appointments outside of school hours, whenever possible, to avoid unnecessary absences is something to be considered, though sometimes we don't have a lot of control over that. And as discussed, attendance issues are often a symptom of something deeper, which is why your relationship with your child is so important. So, approaching them with empathy can help uncover what's getting in the way of attendance and allow you to be an ally in finding solutions. So, this doesn't mean you lower your expectations or, that you're permissive or that school is no longer the expectation, but it means connecting with your child and trusting that they're trying their best and working together towards problems and skills that are going to support attendance. It's also important to remember that for some kids, skipping school can be an adaptive or resilient response to a situation that isn't working for them. So, for example, a child might skip school to go to the gym because that's where they feel valued or competent. And in these cases, building on their strengths and interests is key. So, when non attendance patterns are entrenched, change rarely happens overnight. And this is where we really need to celebrate small successes because every improvement counts. And finally, engaging with the school and community supports is crucial. This can't just fall on parents alone. It really takes a whole community effort to truly support children in attending school. So I also want to acknowledge that even when you're doing everything you can to support a child or a young person with chronic absenteeism, there's no magic formula. Supporting a child who struggles with attendance is hard. At least that's been my experience. And in many cases, the hopes and dreams that you had for your child's success may need to be recalibrated. You might, see them fall behind or worry about what the future holds. And this is where it becomes so important to lean on your network, people who can help, or even just people who understand what you're going through. And these supports can be both informal or formal, from school staff and community programs to friends, families, and other parents who just get it. So if you're looking for additional resources, please go back and check out the resource on PCMH's website, where you'll find a list of vetted supports that can help you and your child along the way. And as we continue to learn and support our children together, I want to draw your attention to the Canadian School Attendance Partnership, which is a university community initiative that I'm proud to be a part of. And this partnership uses school attendance as an entry point to better understand and address the social, psychological, and health challenges that affect the development and well-being of children and youth. We're actively involved in research on school attendance, and we'd love for you to join our network and be part of this work. So to wrap up, I'll leave you with a few key takeaways before I turn it over for questions. So first, school attendance is often a symptom of deeper issues and shaped by multiple causes. Parents play an important role in solutions, but the responsibility to address school attendance can't fall on them alone. We have a need collectively, societally, to better understand the causes and lived experiences of school attendance problems, particularly in Canada, to identify solutions that are going to work at the individual school, community, and system levels. And again, addressing attendance requires a whole community approach. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over for questions.
Wow, thank you so much, Natasha. That was amazing information in a very short amount of time. And I really appreciate the fact that you're able to share that there needs to be a community approach and that this doesn't just lie on parents alone, because I think that oftentimes I'm also a mom with lived experience and had a son who couldn't get to school. And I carried a lot of that weight of the responsibility. Like, what am I doing wrong that he's not getting there? This is a good home. I'm a good parent. He's not in, he's not in trouble. He's not having any difficulties at school. I don't understand. And so I think these are often the things that go on in our own home, in our own head, and even within our own families that we don't often know where to turn next. So we received a lot of questions that I think some of your content absolutely touched on, but I thought I would sort of raise a couple of questions that came through. Really, what we were hearing in our questions from parents and professionals is how the school and parents can work together. Can you give some maybe top tips on how to start that conversation?
Yeah, I think my top tip would be don't wait. So as soon as you have an inkling that, something's not working, reaching out to the school to talk about it, whether that's a trusted teacher, whether that's, your attendance counselor, whether that's the VP, making that contact and flagging your needs, your child's needs. Speaking from my own experience rather than research, I think it can be easy to shut down sometimes. You get these calls and you feel disempowered, you're not sure what to do next, but keeping those lines of communication open, knowing that the school is probably your best ally in finding solutions to support your child to come back, whether that's the small steps that I talked about or some larger scale interventions. So that communication is absolutely key.
Interestingly enough, we got questions from the school staff side of it as well, and they were looking for tips on how to support families and how to sort of help address the barriers that families might be facing. And so I know from our perspective in our peer support program at PCMH, I would say and share that from the family's perspective, just coming to us with compassion and understanding and opening up the conversation by saying, this is really hard and we've got to work on this together. You're not alone in this would be a great way to start the conversation. But do you have any tips as well that you could share with educators who might want to kind of talk to a family about how to help work together?
I'm not sure if it's a tip, but definitely speaking from my lens, which is population health, I really see school attendance as a public health issue that, as I said, sits at so many levels. So, the parents are one part of it, the school is one part of it. And I think when we get into kind of that shame and blame, right, about it's the school, it's the parent, the families, we get stuck. But, really we're all involved. We all have a role to play in getting our kids to school and making school engaging and meaningful and helping them feel welcome and giving them that sense of belonging. So I think it's really about reaching out to each other as collaborators and partners rather than, in opposition.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that perspective. And I know we always say parents know their kids best. And, it's really important to listen to parents too and what they're saying and really make them collaborative partners in the solution. So I would agree with everything you said. And that leads me to one of the questions that came through from a parent. They were kind of asking, what your opinion of a soft start is. And my understanding of a soft start is when you're sort of helping your kiddo ease into school, whether that's on the teaching side of it or as a family, you're kind of not rushing to get there on time. You're maybe just working with the child at their pace and trying to get them to school, period. So I guess it comes from both the lens of the school offering a soft start and supporting a soft start, and the family kind of living that way. Do you have opinions on that?
I mean, again, I don't have research evidence to back this up, sadly. So I'd love to see, initiatives like this evaluated.
Yeah.
But I think it goes back to celebrating the small successes, right? So you know your child best, you know what they're capable of, you know what might work. Working with the school to co-develop a plan that's going to scaffold that attendance over time, and then celebrating all the steps that you and your family are taking towards reaching those goals. We know that education needs to look different for different kids. There's no one size fits all. And I think it's the same with attendance interventions, where some things like a slow start are going to work really well for some kids. You know, taking your time getting to school, easing them in, doing that slow handoff. Whereas for other kids, that just isn't going to be effective. So it's really about getting to know what's going to work for you and your family and doing that in collaboration with the school so that everyone's on the same team.
I was going to say that would be really important is if as a family you're choosing to do a soft start, to really communicate that with the school so that they're not anticipating your child coming on time, or there's a plan, because I know there's attendance trackers, for example, at a lot of schools, right? And I know when my son wasn't getting to school, I was getting calls every day from the attendance system that he had missed. And that actually created more stress for me than not, but in my situation, but I can understand how the collaboration, like you've mentioned, is so key. Some of the other questions that came through were more around kind of supporting young people. So we know at a certain age, they're kind of more in charge of their bodies and their decisions day to day than we are. We're just there to guide them and support them. And so if you've got like a 16-year-old that isn't going to school, what would be some of your top tips to a parent to consider in that case?
Yeah, I always go back to focus on the relationship. I mean, you can talk about the importance of school till you're blue in the face, but if your child is disengaged and if they're not about to generate solutions with you, and this is an entrenched behavior, you might not get very far. So, whatever you can do to continue to connect with your child, maybe there's a coach that they connect with, maybe there's someone in their environment. It's a hard situation. Again, there's no quick solution or quick fix, but focusing on relationship and keeping the bigger picture in mind, I think is so important. And reaching out for help, not just for your child, but again, as I said, it can be really hard as a parent to see that play out. And it maybe isn't the hopes and dreams you had for your child. And so making sure that you're in a place to be regulated and in connection with your child is super important.
And connecting with other peers and families that are going through it. So, connecting with a program like Parents for Children's Mental Health, we have one-to-one peer support, we have groups available virtually, in person, depending on where you are in the province. And so, connecting with us, because there are a lot of families living this, which is why we're doing this webinar today. We know you shared the statistics, it's quite high. A lot of families going through this right now. So, if we could all work together and support each other, it would feel less isolating, right? And being able to talk about it, I think also helps you feel less distress as a parent when you can talk openly about it. One of the other questions that came up is talking about rewards and consequences. And I know that you were talking about obviously focusing on relationship, but also you had mentioned earlier in the webinar just about the fact that there's not a lot of evidence base to show anything here, and in terms of what works and what doesn't work. And I know rewards and consequences to some parents means, well, if there's no consequence, then I'm not holding my expectations and I'm just letting them get away with it. And you had mentioned that just because you're being supportive and focusing on relationship doesn't mean you're not having the expectation that they have to get to school. So, how do you balance that difference between focusing on relationship but also holding the expectation?
That's a great question. So I think this brings us down the trail of collaborative problem solving, which is really based on the idea that kids, young people are doing the best that they can. And if they're not meeting the expectation, it's because something is getting in their way. And so the whole premise of reward and expectation is based on motivation. So if my kid was more motivated with this candy or with this ice cream cone on Friday or whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
they would get to school. And we know that's not the case. Kids are missing for all kinds of reason, and motivation, maybe for some is a reason, but definitely not for the majority. And so, there's no amount of reward or consequence that's going to teach a skill. Now, having said that, if you are doing the ice cream cone on Fridays and that's working to get your child in school, all power to you, do that.
Yeah, if it's working, great.
That's right. But yeah, I mean, in most cases, that's not enough to build skills. And so, what we really want to do is listen with empathy to the child's concerns or the young person's concerns. So, what is getting in the way? And that can be really hard as a parent. We think we know what's getting in the way, but really putting yourself in your children's shoes and being open and curious about what those things are can be a lengthy process, especially when you have, as you described, a teenager who isn't ready to open up or isn't in a place to do that. And it's only once you've understood their concerns, expressed your concern about what it is about attendance that's important to you, that you can then start generating solutions together. And the more you can stay in that unpacking of the concerns, I think the more that solution will kind of manifest itself in response to what you've uncovered.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think what we'll do is we'll link some collaborative problem solving links so that families can look at that after watching this webinar, because I think that's super important to have those resources available. Because you're right, if you focus on the relationship and that trust gets built, even if it's not something like if you're struggling with your teen and you haven't been in a place to have those conversations, it's never too late to start. And it's never too late to start being curious. And I think sometimes as parents, we get exasperated and exhausted, and we just go to a place of making assumptions that they're choosing not to go to school, that they're lazy, or that they're too tired because they're staying up all night. Or, we start to make assumptions without actually really listening to what they're saying to us, because sometimes it feels like they're speaking another language, right? And so, super important to have those conversations and create that safe space to have them. So I really appreciate that, and we'll definitely link that. So look for links below to our resource on the Family Care Center, as well as for collaborative problem solving. The last question I have is more related to specific mental health needs, Natasha. There were a lot of questions coming in related to how do I support my youth or my child who has trauma and isn't going to school, or they're dealing with grief and loss and it's impacting their attendance. What about they're depressed and they're living through day to day with depression and it's really hard to get them to school, or their anxiety is peaked. So we have very specific mental health needs. What would you recommend?
Yeah, so again, it's hard to come up with a blanket solution, but of course, my first recommendation would be to reach out for help. I mean, again, these are not issues that any one family can solve on their own. So, taking advantage of the community resources that are available can be really helpful, and those are linked in the resource as well. I would also just, put out there that even when someone is anxious, they might also be able to attend school. So these aren't all or nothing situations where I am so anxious, I'm going to take some time off school. Sometimes it's I am so anxious and I'm also going to try these small steps towards getting back to school. So not assuming that because your child is going through something difficult that we can ease that burden by taking school away. School is still important and school can be a really great source of support for young people, whether it's through their friends or through the staff or support teams at the schools. Yeah, I would say ask for help.
I think that's great advice. And I know that, as you mentioned in the resource, we link folks to that. And on our Family Care Center, we have a Find Help tool where you can connect with your local community child and youth resources there, as well as One Stop Talk. We have linked as well, which is an immediate support service that youth 17 and under, children and youth, can access either on their own or with a parent's support to talk to a counselor directly and immediately. And then next steps are figured out from there. So I think as a province, we're really trying to get supports in place for families around this. And I really appreciate everything you've shared today. I think what stands out for me, and if I could share with parents, is just that you're not alone in this. It's not your fault. There are a lot of things happening in our society as a whole right now that are impacting our kids. So we have to look at what's happening as a family, what's happening individually for your kiddo, what's happening at the school level, and then even in the community, and kind of really trying to bring everybody to the table to help support your family in this. And so thank you, Natasha, for really kind of highlighting these pieces, because again, I think families and schools probably feel alone in this at times. And the fact that we just need to work together is giving me some hope and focusing on just getting to school in some way and starting there and celebrating when that happens so that it continues to build positive momentum is a great way to look at this. So thank you so much for your expertise.
Thank you so much.